June, 1874. The first light of dawn spreads across the Wyoming prairie. A pale sun pushes through the horizon, spilling gold over fields of tall grass, swaying against the wind. Dust lingers in the air, carried from yesterday's cattle drive, and the faint creak of a wooden windmill groans against the silence. Morning has begun on the Carson ranch. Emma Carson steps out from the porch, her dress brushing the wooden steps, a shawl tight around her shoulders. She is 22, slight in frame, with hands more familiar with books and sewing needles than ropes and harnesses. But this morning, like most mornings, she is determined to prove herself. Her eyes fix on the old stone well at the edge of the yard. A rope dangles, tied to a bucket heavy with water from the night before. She grips it with both hands, braces her boots in the dirt, and pulls. The rope burns against her palms, the weight jerking back with a force she can barely control. Her brother's voice cuts across the morning. "Well, would you look at that?" Emma's wrestling with a bucket again. "Careful now, sister, you might break a nail." Laughter ripples from two ranch hands nearby. Emma's jaw tightens, her arms straining as the bucket inches upward, sloshing water over the rim. The harder she pulls, the shakier her knees become. "You'll never be useful on a ranch. Best stick to stitching tablecloths." The bucket slips, crashing back into the well with a splash that echoes like thunder in her ears. The men laugh harder. Emma stands frozen, her cheeks burning crimson. Her breath hitches, but she forces her chin up. She refuses to cry. Not here, not in front of them. Her hands tremble at her sides. She wants to shout, to claw back her dignity, but the words catch in her throat. She swallows the pain, instead silent. As always, Caleb tips his hat toward the ranch hands, grinning at their shared joke, before striding off toward the barn. The men follow, still chuckling, and just like that, Emma is left alone beside the well, her shame soaking deeper than the bucket ever could. She lowers her gaze, whispers to herself so faint it barely leaves her lips, "I'll never be strong enough." The prairie wind answers, whistling through the grass as if carrying her words into the emptiness. Emma starts to turn away, her steps heavy, when the sound of hooves drifts across the yard. She glances toward the corral. A stranger has arrived. He sits tall in the saddle of a chestnut horse, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. His shoulders are broad, posture steady, and though he rides with a quiet confidence, there is no arrogance in the way he dismounts. His boots hit the earth with a thud, dust curling around him. Emma freezes, her embarrassment from moments ago still raw. She brushes at her skirt, as if she could dust away the sting of her brother's words. The man is silent as he leads his horse toward the post. He does not join in the laughter, nor does he look away. Instead, his gaze lingers on Emma, not in judgment, not in pity, just seeing. The corral gate groans as he pushes it open, and the horse nickers softly. Luke strokes its neck with a patience that feels almost holy, his touch calm, unhurried. Emma can't help but notice how differently he treats the animal, respectful as though strength and kindness can live in the same hand. For a moment, her shame eases under the weight of his steady presence. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. His silence says more than Caleb's mocking ever could. And in that first quiet glance across the morning dust, Emma feels something she has never felt before, the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone will see in her what no one else ever has. The camera lingers on Emma's face, her breath caught between fear and curiosity, as the prairie wind carries the promise of change. The sun climbs high over the Wyoming prairie, baking the earth in a pale haze. Dust curls up in little devils across the yard as a lone rider makes his way down the trail toward the Carson ranch. His name is Luke. His frame is strong, but his gait carries a weight that speaks of long miles and harder years. When he dismounts, there's a faint stiffness in his left leg, a limp, subtle but unmistakable. A scar, though unseen, lives in his steps. He ties his horse to the post with quiet efficiency, every movement deliberate, unhurried. Caleb notices from the barn, leaning against the doorway with his arms folded, his eyes narrow, sizing the newcomer up. The ranch has seen its share of drifters, men with empty promises and heavier hands. Caleb figures this one's no different, looking for work, cowboy, or just a place to rest those boots. Luke lifts his gaze slowly, his voice is low, even. "Work, if you've got it." The exchange is brief, but the tension clings. Caleb squints, trying to read the stranger. Emma, watching from the porch, sees something different, not the limp, not the guarded posture. She notices the way Luke lays a hand against his horse's neck before stepping away, as though he's leaving a piece of himself behind, gentle, reverent, like the animal's trust matters more than words. Something about that steadiness lodges in her chest. The Carson family sits down. For supper that evening, the table creaks under the weight of cornbread, beans, and roast beef, though the silence is heavier still. Caleb takes his place at the head, Emma across from him, and Luke, if only out of necessity, sits near the end. The lantern light flickers across weathered wood, throwing shadows that sway with every shift of the flame. Forks clink softly against tin plates. It doesn't take long before Caleb breaks the quiet, his voice carrying that same mocking edge Emma knows too well. Careful passing the dishes. Emma wouldn't want those delicate hands, or yours, to tire out. The ranch hands at the table snicker. Emma freezes, her hand tightening on the serving spoon. Her throat feels hot, her cheeks prickling with the familiar sting of humiliation. Then Luke's voice cuts through the laughter, calm, firm. Strength ain't always in the arms. Sometimes it's in the heart. The table falls still. Even the lantern seems to flicker quieter. Emma blinks, stunned. No one has ever spoken up for her before. Caleb stares at Luke, his smirk fading into something harder, colder. Don't go fooling yourself, stranger. Around here, arms do the work. Hearts don't pull wagons or mend fences. Luke doesn't rise to the bait. He simply meets Caleb's glare, his eyes steady, and then lowers them back to his plate. The conversation moves on, but the air doesn't ease. For Emma, something shifts. A seed, planted deep, takes root. Someone had seen her pain and dared to answer it. Hours later, when the house is quieted, Luke steps outside. The prairie night stretches endless, the stars sharp as silver nails in a sky of black velvet. He walks slowly, boots crunching over gravel, his limp noticeable now without the day's distractions. Emma lingers at the upstairs window, the curtain brushing her fingers. She watches him move beneath the starlight, her heart caught in the strange quiet he carries. Not pity, not curiosity, something gentler. The wind stirs the cottonwoods, whispering secrets through their leaves. Emma presses her forehead to the glass, drawn to a feeling she doesn't yet understand. And in that silence between the stars above and the dust beneath, the first threads of something new begin to weave. Not love, not yet, but the faint promise of it. The camera lingers on Emma's face in the window, Luke's shadow moving across the yard below. As the prairie night swallows the last of the day's bitterness, days slipped into one another beneath the wide Wyoming sky. The prairie stretched endless, the horizon painted with dust and sunlight, and the Carson ranch moved to the rhythm of work. Emma, though mocked and doubted, refused to fade into the background. She rose earlier, worked harder, her determination stitched into every motion. One afternoon, she stood beside the corral, awkwardly fumbling with a bale of hay. Her arms ached, her dress gathered dust at the hem, but she pressed on. Luke, leaning nearby with a pitchfork in hand, watched quietly. He didn't rush forward to rescue her, didn't rob her of the effort. Instead, when she nearly lost her grip, his voice cut through the cicada hum low. Steady. Shift your weight, Miss Carson. Pull from the legs, not the arms. Emma swallowed, nodding. She adjusted, heaving the bale into place. Her chest heaved, sweat dampening her temples, but she managed. Luke gave a single nod, silent approval, heavy with meaning. Emma caught her breath, her heart tightening in a strange new way. His encouragement wasn't loud or exaggerated, but it lingered deeper than praise ever had. The smell of leather and hay hung thick in the barn. Dust floated like golden flecks in the shafts of sunlight pouring through the slats. Emma moved carefully, carrying oats to one of the restless mares. The animal tossed its head, snorting. Luke stepped close, his hand brushing hers as he reached for the reins. The touch was brief, barely more than a whisper, but Emma's pulse stumbled. She glanced up. His eyes met hers, steady as always, unreadable yet filled with something unspoken. Neither spoke, neither needed to. The silence between them said more than words could. Emma lowered her gaze quickly, cheeks warm. Yet, she didn't pull her hand away, and Lukey didn't either. Cicadas droned in the dusky stillness. Wagons rumbled faintly on the distant trail, raising plumes of dust that drifted with the sunset. Emma sat on the porch steps, her skirts pulled around her. Luke leaned against the post a few feet away, sharpening a small knife with slow, measured strokes. The quiet was not uncomfortable. It was a kind of companionship Emma had never known, where presence itself was enough. Her brother's voice shattered it. Caleb strode across the yard, boots grinding the dirt, his eyes sharp. "Don't waste your time, cowboy. She only slow you down." Emma stiffened, her fingers clutching the fabric of her dress. The shame was familiar, but this time, before it could seep too deep, Luke answered. His tone was calm, but unshakable. "Then I'll take slow." "Over cruel." The words landed heavy. Caleb's jaw tightened, his smirk faltering into something darker. For the first time, Emma saw her brother unsettled. Caleb spat into the dirt and stalked away, muttering. The night reclaimed its quiet, cicadas filling the space his bitterness left behind. Emma sat frozen, her heart thundering. She turned slightly, her eyes finding Luke again. He had gone back to sharpening the blade, his expression unchanged, as though he hadn't just shaken the ground beneath her. But Emma felt it. Strength was not loud. It wasn't cruel, or mocking, or heavy-handed. It was quiet, gentle, patient, and perhaps she had more of it in her than she'd ever believed. The camera lingers on Emma's face, caught between awe and awakening, the prairie dusk folding around them both as shadows deepen. The day began calm. The prairie stretched quiet beneath a pale blue sky, but by late afternoon, the air turned restless. A wind picked up, bending the grass in uneasy waves, and dark clouds rolled in from the west, heavy and fast. The smell of rain clung sharp in the air. Emma stood beside Luke near the barn, helping to bring the horses in before the storm broke. Her skirts whipped against her legs, hair pulled loose from its braid by the rising gusts. She held a rope clumsily, trying to guide a nervous mare into its stall. "Easy now. Keep your movements calm. Horses feel what you feel." Emma nodded, trying to still her racing pulse. The sky rumbled above them, a low growl that made the animals stamp and toss their heads. The first sheets of rain came hard, pounding against the tin roof of the barn. Thunder cracked, sharp and violent, sending one of the younger colts into a frenzy. The rope slipped from Emma's hands as the animal bolted. Crashing through the half-open gate, Emma gasped, spinning as the colt tore past, Hurt's hooves slicing the mud dangerously close. For a heartbeat, she froze. Then strong hands caught her, pulling her back just as the colt thundered by. Luke's arm locked around her waist, steadying her against the barn wall. "Stay back," he's panicked. The rain poured harder, soaking them both, the world reduced to noise and chaos. The colt circled wildly in the yard, eyes rolling white, rope trailing like a whip behind it. Emma's breath came in ragged bursts. She should step back, let Luke handle it. But something in her chest surged fear, yes, but also fire. She snatched the rope from where it dragged through the mud, gripping it with trembling hands. Her boots slipped, but she dug in, pulling with all the strength she had. "Whoa, easy, boy, easy." The colt fought, rearing against the storm. Mud splashed her dress, rain plastered her hair to her face. Every muscle screamed. Still, she held on. Luke moved in, his hands steady on the rope beside hers. Together, step by careful step, they coaxed the animal back toward the stall. Emma's body shook, but she didn't let go. At last, with a final shove, the colt stumbled inside. Luke slammed the gate closed, the latch catching with a clang. The barn fell into stillness, save for the pounding rain on the roof. Emma sagged against the wall, drenched, mud streaked across her dress. Her chest heaved, lungs burning. Luke turned to her, water dripping from the brim of his hat. His eyes searched hers, steady, filled with something she couldn't name. He reached out, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face with rough fingers. "You were strong enough." When it mattered, Emma's breath caught. The words cut through the storm louder than thunder, anchoring themselves deep inside her. Her hands still shook, but she realized they were trembling not from weakness, but from the fight she'd just given, from the courage she hadn't known she carried. The storm raged outside, wind howling through the cracks, but in that moment, all Emma could hear was the thundering of her own heart. She sagged forward, collapsing into Luke's arms. His chest was warm despite the rain, his hold firm yet gentle, steadying her as though she belonged there. For the first time, Emma didn't feel like a burden. She felt capable, alive. Courage, she learned, was not the absence of fear. It was standing, trembling, in the face of it and holding on anyway. The camera lingers on Emma in Luke's arms, her eyes wide with newfound realization as lightning splits the sky outside the barn. Days passed, and the prairie seemed gentler now, washed clean by the storm. Emma felt the same change within herself. Something had shifted that night in the barn when she had held the rope with her own hands, when Luke's words had anchored themselves in her heart. She walked with her head a little higher, her shoulders straighter, but not everyone welcomed the change. Caleb noticed the difference, and it gnawed at him like a thorn under the skin. His jabs grew sharper, his laughter meaner. When Emma lifted a pail of water without faltering, he smirked. When she managed the chickens before dawn, he muttered loud enough for her to hear. Still the weakest girl in 3 counties, Emma no longer crumbled. She didn't fight him openly, there was no shouting, no flaring words, but when he sneered, she held his gaze just long enough to make him uneasy. When he mocked, she went on with her work, quiet defiance, stronger than any argument. The evening of the harvest gathering arrived. The barn glowed with lanterns strung along rafters, golden light spilling into the night. Fiddles sang, boots stomped, and laughter carried over the prairie. Townfolks danced in spinning circles, skirts twirling, spurs clinking against the boards. Emma stood near the wall, smoothing her plain dress, watching others move with effortless grace. She felt the weight of eyes, whispers trailing just beyond hearing. Caleb leaned against a beam, arms folded, his smirk sharpened by the glow of lantern light. When Emma stepped forward, trying to blend into the crowd, Caleb's voice rang out, louder than the fiddle. There she is, the weakest girl in 3 counties. Surprised she even made it through the storm without falling apart. Laughter rippled through the group. Emma's cheeks burned. She dropped her gaze to the floorboards, the music suddenly harsh in her ears. Then silence. The fiddle paused, conversations stilled. Luke had stepped into the circle, tall, steady, his hat shadowing his eyes. He looked at Caleb, then at Emma. Without a word, he extended his hand. The crowd seemed to hold its breath. Caleb's smirk faltered. Emma blinked, unsure if she should move, but Luke's hand stayed, patient, unwavering. Her fingers trembled as she placed them in his dot. Luke led her into the open floor, the lantern glow softening around them. The fiddle started again, slower this time, as though the music itself bent to their pace. They moved together, not with polished grace, but with something deeper in spoken trust. Luke's hand rested firm at her back, guiding without controlling. Emma's steps faltered at first, but he steadied her, and soon the rhythm carried them both. Around them, the barn dimmed into nothing, the gossiping eyes, the laughter, even Caleb's scowl at the edge of the crowd. For Emma, the world shrank to the warmth of Luke's hand, and the sound of his voice, low against her ear. You don't need to prove anything, you're already strong enough for me. Emma's chest tightened, tears pricked her eyes, shimmering in the lantern light, but she did not let them fall. For the first time, she felt whole, seen not as a burden, but as a woman who had survived storms, both outside and within. Her hand tightened slightly in Luke's, a silent thank you. His answering smile was small, almost hidden, but it steadied her more than any words. As the dance ended, Luke released her gently, but his gaze lingered. Emma stood taller, her chin lifted, her breath steady. Caleb looked away, his jaw tight, his mockery silenced for now. Emma had not shouted, had not fought. She had simply stood and been chosen. Strength, she realized, was not always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and unshakable, like a hand reaching out in the dark, asking her to dance. The camera lingers on Emma's glowing face in the lantern light. Luke just a step beside her, while Caleb fades into shadow at the edge of the crowd. The night after the dance, the barn was hushed, except for the creak of beams in the prairie wind. Lantern light flickered against the walls as Caleb's shadow loomed. He stepped into Emma's path, his voice sharp, anger rolling off him like a storm that had lost its control. So this is who you are now, weak in the head as well as the hands, falling for a drifter who don't even belong here. His words might once have cut her down, left her trembling and silent, but tonight, Emma stood straighter. Her breath was steady, her hands no longer hiding in her skirts. She met his glare, calm and unwavering. Weak is choosing cruelty. I'd rather be kind. The barn seemed to still. Ranch hands nearby froze, their eyes darting between the siblings. For the first time, Caleb found no easy victory in her silence. Her words hung in the air, soft but unshakable, heavier than any shout. Caleb's jaw worked, fury flashing in his eyes. With no retort, he shoved past her, boots pounding into the dirt outside. His shadow slipped into the night, and with it, the weight that had long pressed against Emma's shoulders. Later, the moon cast silver across the prairie, the night wind brushing through the grass like whispers. Emma walked to the well, the same place where days ago her hands had trembled under Caleb's gears, where shame had burned her cheeks. She sat on the wooden edge, the rope swaying softly in the night air. Her reflection shimmered in the dark water, and for the first time she did not see frailty staring back. She saw a woman who had endured, who had bent but never broken. Footsteps approached. She didn't startle. She knew the sound of those boots. Luke stopped a pace from her, hat in hand. He didn't speak right away. He simply lowered himself onto the well's edge beside her, the boards creaking under his weight. His presence was quiet, steady as if the prairie itself had taken human form and sat there with her. For a long while, they said nothing. The night carried its own song. The rustle of grass, the distant call of a coyote, the steady hum of crickets. At last, Luke reached out, his hand rough with work, scarred from old wounds. Slowly, he laid it over hers. Emma's breath caught, not from fear, not from shame, but from the deep calm that settled between them. She looked down at their joined hands, his broad and weathered, hers small but steady. Once, she had thought strength meant lifting heavy loads, never faltering, never needing help. Now she knew better. Her voice was barely above a whisper. It was never about the buckets, was it? Luke's thumb brushed gently against her knuckles. No, it was always about how you carry yourself. Even when the world tries to weigh you down. Tears welled in Emma's eyes, but this time they came with a smile, the kind that grows from the heart outward. She leaned back slightly, letting the prairie wind cool her face. Emma realized she had transformed. Her strength wasn't born from the storm or from Luke's defense. It had always been there. It lived in her resilience, in her quiet gentleness, in her choice to keep loving even when mocked. Luke had seen it, believed it, until she could believe it herself. The two sat side by side at the well, hands entwined, the moon casting their shadows long across the earth. No grand speeches, no declarations, just trust, steady and unshakable. For Emma, the well was no longer a place of humiliation. It had become the place she broke free, where she claimed her strength and found it mirrored in another's eyes. And in that silence, under the endless prairie sky, the first seeds of a new life, one of hope, love, and freedom quietly took root. The prairie was hushed beneath the first blush of dawn. A thin veil of mist drifted across the fields, painted gold as the sun edged over the horizon. The world felt new, reborn in light. Emma stood at the well, the same place where shame had once burned her cheeks, where her brother's laughter had echoed like chains around her spirit. But this morning was different. Her fingers curled around the rope, rough hemp biting into her palms. She braced herself, pulling hand over hand, her breath measured and steady. The bucket rose inch by inch, its weight straining her arms. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't easy, but she didn't falter. At last, with a final tug, the bucket cleared the stone lip of the well. Water sloshed and sparkled in the early light. Emma straightened, chest rising with exertion, hair tumbling loose across her shoulders, and she smiled, not for anyone else, for herself. From across the yard, Caleb leaned against a fence post, arms crossed, his face carved in bitterness. His eyes narrowed, searching for weakness, waiting for her to stumble. But she did not stumble. She lifted the bucket, turned, and carried it away with quiet resolve. Not a challenge, not a boast, simply a truth he could no longer deny. For the first time, his voice held no power here. The cruel laughter that had once pierced her heart now sounded hollow even in his own chest. Caleb turned away, defeated not by Emma's fists or shouts, but by her unshakable calm. Behind her, footsteps crunched softly on the dirt. She knew the rhythm by now, steady and sure. Luke came to stand beside her, his shadow long in the growing light. He didn't take the bucket from her hands. He didn't rush to lift it, or to spare her effort. Instead, he simply placed his hand at the small of her back, a touch, so light it was almost a promise. Emma turned her head, her eyes meeting his. What she saw there was not pity, not rescue, but recognition. "I am strong enough." Her words were simple, yet the morning seemed to still around them, the wind carrying her voice across the waking prairie. Luke's gaze softened, the corners of his mouth lifting. His reply was quiet, reverent, as if spoken to her heart alone. "Strong enough for me." The bucket of water rested at Emma's side, but neither of them looked at it. Their eyes lingered on each other, the silence between them thick with promise. Above, the sun crested the horizon fully, flooding the land in gold. Emma's hair caught the light, shimmering like fire, her figure outlined against the endless fields. She stood tall, unbowed, no longer the girl mocked at dawn, but the woman who had claimed her place in the world. Luke stepped closer, his hand finding hers. Together, they stood facing the sunrise. Two silhouettes bound not by rescue or dependence, but by a love built on quiet strength. And so, beneath the rising sun, Emma's journey came full circle. From trembling silence to steady resolve, from shame to strength, she had found her voice. And in Luke's unwavering presence, she discovered not who made her strong, but who saw that she already was. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, wide and waiting, like the life they would build together. The camera lingered as the horizon burned with color, the two of them framed in lighter love, not born of weakness, but of recognizing strength, steady as the land itself.